So today we will have a look at how we can use the new commercial VCV VST inside Ableton Live, sequencing, modulation, recording MIDI and so on. There are timestamp links in the description so you can jump around to the part you are interested in. And I will try to keep this video as beginner friendly as I can, so bear with me. And let's start with some general information. So we get two VSTs. When you buy the VCV VST or the VCV Pro Edition, you get the VCV VST instrument and the VST effects. So you can also process sound within VCV with clouds, with other effects and so on. And they will work like any other VST. So if I have here a Midi channel here in Ableton, I can just open the VCV VST. It will open with the template you have saved. This is my template in my case. By the way, you can also save and load patches within VCV. Of course, the patches will be saved also with your projects, but you can load and save patches from within the VST as well. Now, there are a few modules that we will use a lot today, and they are quite essential when working in Ableton in any DAW. This is the Midi to CV module. Oh, by the way, we can also resize the screen, which is quite important when working with bigger patches. So we have the Midi to CV module. This will convert the Midi from Ableton into control voltage or virtual control voltage, or basically signals that we can use inside VCV, like for example, sequences, so pitch information, gates, velocity, clock, so you can send the clock from Ableton and sync VCV with Ableton, basically sending the BPM, if you will. Right, another important module is the CV to Midi. This will do the opposite. It will convert the virtual control voltage, the signals from VCV, into Midi that we can use then in Ableton, again, for sequencing and so on. And another important module, actually, we have a few variations, the audio modules, right? I will use this one for now. You can see everywhere it says also DAW. They are automatically set to work with Ableton in this case. So with the audio modules, we can send and receive audio from VCV or to VCV from and to Ableton. And this we can also multi-track. And I will go through everything in this video. So let's really start with sequencing. Okay, so here we have a simple MIDI sequence. As you can see here, it's just looping, right? So this is MIDI information that I want to send into VCV rack and then sequence VCV rack with this sequence. So we'll start with something really basic, and then later I will show you a few more advanced things you can do. So here I have an instance of the VCV instrument, a VST instrument of VCV, right? If I open it, I have here a simple voice, right? Just plats, if you know plats from mutable instruments, going through a delay and some reverb. So again, as I mentioned before, let me zoom in a bit. We will use the Midi to CV module. Again, we want to convert the Midi from Ableton into CV or virtual CV or signals we can use inside of VCV rack. So basically now we need to use two things. We need to use the pitch information, which in our case is called volt per octave, right? So I'm going to use the pitch information and send it to the volt per octave input of the oscillator, and the gates that will tell this voice when to play, again, according to the Midi. In this case, it will go to the trigger input, right? And now, again, we need to connect also the audio. So we will use the audio module, and I will send the audio to the left and to the right. So now if I hit play in Ableton, basically we will get the sequence. Let's take the delay down for now, right? So already we can sequence VCV rack within Ableton. Of course, you can create all sorts of crazy sequences, just like you will do when working with other VSTs. Now, two more things I want to show you. First of all is the clock. I want to sync the delay with the clock. Now, there are a few things we can use. There is the clock output, and there is the clock /n or number output, which basically is a clock division. So the clock basically is the BPM. I want to send the BPM of Ableton. I want the delay of VCV rack to be synced to the BPM of Ableton. For this, we will use the clock division because there I have more control over the division of or the multiplication of the clock, and this I can do in the right-click menu. We have here clock divider. I can choose quarter notes, half notes, 16th notes, and different clock resolutions, right? So if I change this, for example, to 8 notes, now when I send this clock to the sync input of the delay, you can see we have here a sync, and now the delay is synced to this clock. Right, and I can change within this clock, I can change the division of the delay or the delay time, and it's synced to the clock of Ableton. Of course, you will see a more advanced example soon enough. Another thing I want to show you is the velocity. We can also have the velocity of the notes controlling our voice. In this case, I will just use it to control the brightness of this voice. Right, and now if I go back to the Midi and I say, for example, right, I take the velocity a bit down, right? How cool is this? Right, so this is basically how you will sequence VCV from Ableton, but let's have a look at something a bit more advanced. Okay, so here we have something a bit more advanced. Here I have an instance of VCV rack, and I have here a sequence, right, a sort of a pattern. And what I have in VCV rack, there are a few things I want to show you. Here I have a more advanced voice. Befaco modules are also available in VCV rack, which is amazing, right? So I have here basically an oscillator and a filter, right, and an envelope, some delay, reverb. And what I'm doing here are a few things. First of all, I'm sequencing the pitch and the gates, just like I showed you before, right, with the volt per octave and with the gate output. Now I'm also using velocity here. Now again, because this is a modular environment, you can use velocity for anything. You don't have to use velocity just for velocity, just like before I used it to change the brightness of a voice. You can use it for all sorts of things. Here again, I'm using it to change the brightness through the filter. And I'm also using it to change the actual volume, the velocity of this voice, right? So if I play it, this will sound like this. Right? Sequencing this voice, changes in brightness, in velocity. Let me show you the VCA here. Right, now have a look here. I want to show you also the stability of the clock. So I'm sending, in this case, the clock output, right, which will output a clock at a high resolution, basically the BPM of Ableton in this case. It's going to a clock module in VCV rack that works perfectly with external clock signals. So if you want to sync a clock and other stuff, I will show you also a sequencer here in a second. You can use this clock module, and you can see I have here the BPM rock solid at 95, which is exactly the BPM of Ableton. This was not a good arrow, just a second, something like this, right? 95, so it's rock solid, it's perfectly in sync, right, which is amazing. And I'm also using the divided clock to drive here, to sync the delay. And I'm using the gates to trigger a sequencer that is modulating the decay time. So basically it's modular. You can do so many things inside of Ableton, inside of VCV rack, and combine the two, the clocks, the BPM, the velocity and everything and so on. Now I have here another example. Let me stop this. We can also sequence VCV rack polyphonically. VCV rack is polyphonic, right? So here I have some chords, as you can see, right? There are 4 notes. They have 4 notes each chord, right? So in VCV rack, In the right-click menu of the MIDI to CV module, again, it's converting MIDI from Ableton into signals we can use in VCV rack. In the right-click menu, we have polyphony channels. We can choose how many voices of polyphony until 16 voices we want to use. In this case, I'm using 4. Again, I have 4-note chords. If you want to know more about polyphony, by the way, I have a video all about polyphony in VCV Rack 1, which will work more or less the same in VCV Rack 2. So you can watch it. I will also make a dedicated video for VCV 2, polyphony in VCV 2. So basically I have here a polyphonic signal, right? A polyphonic voice being processed by clouds for mutable instruments, which is always fun. So let's have a listen to the chords. Right, and again, you are in a modular environment, which means that you can do all sorts of modulation. Right, so also polyphonic sequencing is possible. Now you can also sequence drums and percussive sounds. I mean, you don't have to sequence only voices. So here I have something set up. I have here another sequence. Right, I have here some notes and some notes with randomness, with chance also set. Right, and in VCV Rack, if we have a look, before VCV Rack, actually, I want to show you, I'm sending the MIDI here to the arpeggiator to arpeggiate those notes and create different drum patterns, sending it to the velocity. I want to call it a module, a device that will randomize the velocity, right? So also the drums will have different velocity, and this is going then to VCV Rack. And in VCV Rack, what we have to use, let me show you this here separately. We have the MIDI to gate module, right? So this will convert MIDI from Ableton into gates we can use in VCV Rack, and you can see you have the notes. Now there is something here to keep in mind. I'm not so sure why it is. Maybe it's a bug that will be fixed. But in Ableton, if you have C, what do I have here? Let's see here. I have, for example, C1. In VCV Rack, it will show as C2, right? So it will come out from C2. I don't know why this is. Again, it can be a bug. It can be this is how things work. I'm not so sure. But anyway, this is the module you will use to trigger gates inside of VCV Rack. So what I have here, again, I have a few drum modules, a few tremors from Volt. I have plats as a snare drum, right? And I'm using mixers to mix everything. And I'm using the MIDI to gate module to send gates or triggers to trigger the drums. And I wanted to show you another thing, but let me play this first. Right? Nice glitchy drums. Now another interesting thing this module has, it's in its right-click menu, we have velocity mode. Basically, and you can see this here on the scope, you can see that the gates have different levels, and you can use this to control all sorts of different things. Also velocity, right? So you can have also the velocity from the randomness velocity that you can see here from Ableton. It's affecting also the gates here. So you just use the same gate signal and you send it to whatever you want to control. I have it here controlling the actual levels on the mixer. So basically the velocity. So we get this lovely, lovely glitchy pattern. So everything together will sound like this. So let's have a quick look at how we can automate things, how we can add automation to VCV Rack. Here I have basically a chord, right? And in VCV Rack I have this voice. You can see I'm sending only the pitch information to the oscillator because it's going through a VCA. VCA basically is a module that can control amplitude. Again, basically the volume. This VCA is closed, but I can open it. Right, and what I want basically is to have automation from Ableton doing this for me, right? So what we have to do in Ableton, we have to open this automation lanes, and already you can see it's set to the level because I touched it. But any parameter now that I move in VCV Rack, if I move, for example, the wavetable position, You can see we get an automation lane. Have a look here, right? We have an automation lane. If I move something else, for example, the level, this is basically what I would like to control, right? What I would like to add automation to. So now I will leave it all the way closed, and I can basically now write automation. There are a few ways we can do this in Ableton. I can add a sine wave. I can also edit it, write something like this. If I hit play, you can see that now we get this automation. Right, let's record something else. Let's see. Right, so basically like this you can write automation. Here's some drums, just not from VCV but from Ableton, and a bass, just for context. Right, and I want in VCV now to record automation. This you can do with an external controller, or you can just play the parameter in VCV and this will record the automation. So let's say that in this case I want to record automation for the wavetable position. Right, you can see it already set the automation lane for me. Now all I have to do is arm this automation record and hit record. And now right, and now I can also record automation. Right, really easy. Now let's have a look at how we can multi-track record VCV rack in Ableton, and basically sending separate voices to separate tracks, audio tracks in Ableton, and multi-track record them. This is amazing that it's possible to do. Already I will tell you, you can do this with up to 16 different channels, mono channels or 8 stereo channels. So this is again VCV rack. I will start again with something simple and then we will have a look at something a bit more advanced. I have here basically a voice going through a mixer and some reverb. And now I want to start by sending this voice into Ableton for recording first of all. So we need, again, as I showed you before, the audio module. Let me make this a bit bigger. We have 3 versions here. We have the audio 2, which has only 2 channels or 2 tracks, let's say. We have the audio 8 that has 8 channels, and we have the audio 16 that has 16 channels. So we can send up to 16 channels into Ableton separately to different tracks and multi-track record them or process them also differently in Ableton, right? So now if I send this voice to channels 1 and 2, we already have this sound, right? But now it's coming from still from the Midi track. This is not what I want. I want to send it to different audio tracks and then multi-track record it. So first of all, I have to take it out of the master. So here, in this case here, I wish I could zoom in a bit, but I hope you can see everything. If I click this menu here, I can send it, for example, just to the sends, right? And then it will not go to the master anymore, to the master output or to the main output. This is a better term to use, the main output, right? And here I have an audio track and I want to send channels 1 and 2 to this audio track. So here we have external input. If I click it, we have VCV rack, right? And now post mixer just means outputs 1 and 2, and then later you can see we have 3 and 4, 5 means 5 and 6, 7 and 8, and so on. So let's leave it at post mixer, right, which is 1 and 2, and now we have to change the monitor settings to in. And we have this voice, as you can see here, with the green lights, with the view meter. We have sound. So this is this voice from VCV rack, right, going to outputs 1 and 2, and going to the audio track number 1. And like this, you can send it to all sorts of different tracks. For example, if I send it to output 9 and 10, right, and I change this instead of post mixer, this will go to 9 and 10. Already you can see there is audio going on there. We have this audio, right? So let me show you a more advanced example. Okay, so here we have a few things going on. I have here a sort of a main VCV instance, right? VCV VST instrument in this case. Let me make this bigger. And here I have a few voices. In this case, I'm sequencing everything from VCV rack. Just like before I showed you with the clock, with the stability of the clock, I'm just sending the clock output to this clock module in VCV. This one is from Impromptu, by the way, if you want to get it. And you can see it's perfectly, let me show you this just a second, perfectly in sync, right, with the BPM of Ableton. And this is driving all sorts of different sequences that I have here, just like this voice here, I have a sequence, right, and sequencing a voice going through some delay, and this is going to outputs 1 and 2 on the Audio 16 module, just like I showed you before. And now I have this here set to sends only, so it's not going to the main output, but I'm routing it to a dedicated audio track. Again, VCV rack, post mixer, and monitoring is set to input, right? So now I have this voice coming out from this audio track and only this voice. And of course, something amazing that you can do, you can add effects on those tracks. So here I have the lovely, amazing Valhalla Supermassive, right? So if I hit play now, this is unmuted, right? We get this voice, only this voice going to this track, to this audio track. Right, everything is synced, everything is working together with Ableton. When I stop, when I start, everything is amazing, and I can now multi-track record because I have here another voice. I have here a sorts of chords, another polyphonic voice in this case with another sequencer within VCV rack, and this is going to outputs or inputs 3 and 4. And now here I have another audio track with inputs or outputs 3 and 4. Set, again, monitoring set to in. So this will play only those chords, only this voice. Let's wait for it. Right? Right, so I get only this voice in this track, and I have here another one, which is a bass. Now let me show you this in VCV. In VCV, basically, there is no sequence, there is nothing. This bass is just droning. It's always playing, it's always there. So as soon as I unmute the track, oh man. Right, again, also here there is some reverb. Right, and this has its own dedicated track. So now when I unmute everything, I can listen to everything together. But I can also record them, right? Multi-track record, again, up to 16 mono channels or 8 stereo channels, and you can have multiple instances of VCV rack, and multi-track record your sessions, edit them later, add effects to them, process them in all sorts of ways, sound design, amazing, endless possibilities. So now let's have a look at how we can sequence things in Ableton from VCV rack, how we can send modulation out of VCV rack, and so on. So here I have one instance of VCV rack in one Midi channel. I have here the lovely sequencer from Impromptu, the probe key, which will output more or less random notes according to the notes I enter. So here you can see I have C, E flat, F, G, and B flat, and each of them has a different chance of playing. Really interesting sequencer, and I want to use this sequencer to sequence, I will show you it here, to sequence an FM voice with the operator here, right, and some effects. Right, so I want the sequence to come from VCV rack. So there are a few things we have to do. First of all, we need to send this information, convert it to MIDI into Ableton. So again, we will use in this case the CV to MIDI module. It will convert the signals from VCV rack into MIDI that Ableton can understand. So what we will use pitch information, again, in VCV rack, in eurorack, in modular, it's called volt per octave, or in eurorack, let's say, right? So in this case, the output, the pitch output is called CV here on the probably key. So I will send this to the volt per octave input. And we also need some sort of a gate to tell the operator when to play. Now this is a bit tricky, and I will show you this in a second also why. But let's start with sending the gate to the gate input of the CV to MIDI. Again, it will convert signals from VCV rack into MIDI that we can then use in Ableton. So we have pitch and we have gates that will drive the operator. Now, on the channel of the operator, we have to set it to receive MIDI from this VCV rack. Just like we did before with audio, here we have to do this with MIDI. Now in Ableton, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can use only one MIDI channel. So you will have to use different instances of VCV rack to do this in Ableton at least. So here we have the all inputs. I don't want it to be set to all inputs. I want to set it to VCV rack. Again, we are using VCV rack to sequence it. And instead of post FX, I'm going to select again VCV rack. And this will make sure that the MIDI coming out of VCV rack will reach only this track in this case. So now when I hit play, we should get the sound of the operator. You can hear those clicks. If I bring up the release time, right? We get this sequence, this sort of random sequence coming from VCV rack sequencing operator. Now I told you this thing with the gates is a bit complicated, not complicated, but you have to be aware of something. Let me add here a scope just so you can see it. Basically, this sequencer, many other sequencers will output a gate in the length of the clock that is coming into them. So in this case, I'm using the clock from Ableton or the BPM from Ableton, which is really just short, really short triggers, right? You can see this here, it has almost no length. Now imagine this, if you're not so familiar with gates and triggers, imagine that you are hitting a key on your keyboard, on your MIDI keyboard, and you let go immediately. There is only a spike of voltage, a spike of signal, and it's not enough for the operator to really play as we like. Again, I have to make sure the release is quite high in order to have a sound. But in VCV rack, there are many ways we can change this. We can convert triggers into gates. One of those ways is using a module. This one is from Bog Audio. It's called D-Gate. It will convert triggers into gates, and we can change the gate length. So if, for example, I use the same, right, the same signal, the same triggers, and let's have a look at this now on the scope. You can see, maybe I will change the color, so this will be a yellow cable, right? So you can see now I can make this trigger or gate longer, right? And I can change the length of the gate, which means basically that we hold the key longer, right? So we will get better results for the operator. So if I will use this, right, from this module, from D-Gate, I will use it to the gate input, right? Already we get better results. And I can have less release time. Right? So now we have pitch information, we have gates, we are basically sequencing this FM operator with VCV rack. Of course, we can also record this sequence. So let's really do this. I will just not disarm this track. Right, so I'm arming this track for recording, right? And now I can basically record this sequence. You can see it's recording it. It's random, so now I can record it. Right, so now we have this recorded. I will just set it to the monitor to auto. And now I don't need VCV rack anymore because I have this random sequence recorded, right? So I can change this back to all ins, right? And if I play, we will get always the same sequence now, this sort of random sequence, but it was recorded. Right, and then again I can go in and I can change some things. Let's say I want this one a bit longer. Right, and if I add some sustain on this voice, I can move it around, I can quantize it if I want, I can do all sorts of different things. Right, so now if I add some sustain, right? So now we have this also recorded. We can record sequences if you are familiar with something like the Turing machine, all sorts of different crazy sequences you can use in VCV, like record them, edit the sequences, create unique sequences, get really inspiration from sequences in VCV rack. Let me stop this for a second. Now, let's talk now a bit about modulation. This is also a bit of an issue here in Ableton, but there are workarounds. So first of all, let's say that I want to send modulation, right? We can modulate, first of all, for example, the velocity of this voice. So basically what I have here on the same CV to MIDI module, we have here velocity, the velocity input. This will go automatically to the velocity of this FM piano voice that I have here. All I have to do is now I will delete this sequence because I don't need it twice, and I will set it back to VCV rack. So it will again receive the modulation, right? Change it to input. So now we get again this sequence, and now let's send also modulation, velocity modulation, right? And let's use a sequencer for this. What shall we use here? Let's use a sequencer for this, right? So here I have a sequencer that I will use for velocity. Right, so now we have also velocity variation or variation in velocity. Right, I can also use something random like sample and hold if you are familiar with sample and hold. Right? Basically stepped random voltage to control the velocity. Now let's say that I want to modulate also other things on the FM piano voice, on this FM voice. Let's say the decay. Right? Now in this case, when you are using native devices or instruments of Ableton, we need to use the expression device, right? The expression control device. And like this, you can see we get all sorts of different parameters we can use to map to this FM voice. I will show you in a second also how you can do this with external VSTs. But let's say that I want to map modulation to the decay time. Right, so I can use, for example, the mod wheel output. Here it says MW, this is the mod wheel output. So I can use, again, I will use in this case a sequencer. This will go to the mod wheel input. And now here you can see mod wheel and there is movement. And now I can map this to, for example, the decay. Right? So now you can see there is also modulation on the decay. Right, and I can also use aftertouch, for example, to change the levels, right, of this second oscillator, to change the brightness. So in VCV, I can use something like an LFO that I have here, send it to the aftertouch AFT input on this CV to MIDI module. And then if we have a look here, you can see aftertouch is also moving. And again, I can map this to this level. Right? So you can send also modulation in this case. Right? So you can sequence, you can record the sequences, you can modulate things. I also want to show you how to modulate external instruments, which is a bit easier than the ones within Ableton. I have here the Juno 6 from, let me close this, from Arturia, right? With the sequence. And I want to modulate from VCV rack, I want to modulate the cutoff. Right, so what I have to do, I have to figure out the CC number for this modulation, for this parameter. So Arturia made it really easy. Here in the options, we can go to MIDI and then we have all of the numbers. So I can see that cutoff is, filter cutoff is 74. Right, so in VCV rack, we have another module. This is the CV to MIDI CC. It will convert signals from VCV rack into MIDI CC messages that we can use in Ableton. Right, I have here this already connected. Let me disconnect it. We need 74. If it's not showing up here, let me zoom in a bit. You can just click one slot and enter 74, enter, right? And then you have it, and you can use the respective input for the modulation. I have here sample and hold that I can just use, and now you can see we have modulation for the cutoff point of the filter, right? With the sample and hold. So again, sequencing, recording sequences, then you can edit them and do whatever you want with them. Modulating external VSTs as well. All very easy and fun and inspiring. Okay, the last thing I want to show you is how you can process sounds from Ableton with VCV rack. Again, as I mentioned before, there are two versions of the VST. When you buy VCV Pro, you get two versions. You get VCV rack 2, the instrument, the VST instrument, and you get also the effects that you can use to process sounds and use basically as an effect. So here I have a few things ready. I have here a sample playing, right? Just a normal pad, and I want to send reverb to it, but I want to use a reverb within VCV. Of course, I'm going to use plateau. So here I have the send, right? The send track, and I have already the VCV Rack 2 FX VST on it, and I have here plateau. Now, for this, we need to send and receive audio from and to Ableton. So I'm going to use the Audio 2 module, which has 2 inputs and 2 outputs. Right now, the outputs will output the sound from Ableton into VCV rack, so this will go to the reverb, right? And the inputs will route the sound from VCV rack back into Ableton, so in this case, I will use the inputs, right? So now we have this send effect going to the reverb and going back to Ableton, and now I can add here some send reverb, right? So let's hit play with plateau in VCV rack, which is quite cool. So now you can use one plateau as a send effect. Right? I have here another send channel. In this case, it has a delay on it, the Chronoblob 2 from Aura devices, but you can see I have a whole chain here, and you can chain as many modules as you want and create all sorts of crazy send effects, right? So first of all, I'm syncing the delay with the clock. Maybe I will zoom in a bit, just so we can see everything better. Right, so I'm sending first of all to the delay, and I'm syncing the delay with the Ableton clock, with the BPM of Ableton. You can see I have, in this case, just the mono signal going there. Right, and then from there, I'm sending this to a filter. I have a filter in the feedback loop of this delay. So there is a filter on the delay also. And this is going, first of all, to a panner. So I'm panning this left and right, right? I'm modulating the panning, so the delay is also panned left and right. I have some modulation also on the filter. So again, you can create a really interesting effect chain. And this is going back into Ableton. So if I add a bit of delay to this pad, right, let's listen to this again. Right, so like this you can create sound effects, but of course you don't have to use only sound effects. You can also process sounds in different ways with different modules in VCV. For example, first of all, here I have a kick and a hi-hat, just for fun. And I have here a sample, right, that for now it's not going through anything. Just a sort of a drone. Right, and now what I want to do in VCV rack, it's going through Shape Master, right, which creates really interesting envelopes. It's a multi-stage envelope generator with 8 different channels you can use and create all sorts of different modulation and envelopes for all sorts of different things. And from there it's going to cloud, so I can process this sound with clouds for mutable instruments. So if I activate this track, right? I can get a really interesting effect and process sounds within VCV Rack, either as a send effect, either as an insert effect, and you can create all sorts of crazy different chains. All you have to remember is you have to send the audio out from Ableton and back into Ableton in order that you will have audio. Right, and that was more or less it. There's so much more to explore now with VCV as a VST. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, if you have any other ideas that you want to share, please leave them in the description. I hope you enjoyed this video. Cheers!